got a curved panel that's much more even from one side to the other. Sit it down here, set it on its side, and that's the best way to look at it on its side, because when you're holding it up, it's going to have some natural twist to it. Okay. So that's how the machine works. It's actually quite a simple machine. The only difference is I've got years of experience running it. Next thing we're going to talk about is troubleshooting. So you get an opportunity to see how we go about figuring out what's wrong with the machine, because there will be issues from time to time, especially as you change from material manufacturers. Things can pop up and you need to know how to deal with them. Next thing we're going to talk about is troubleshooting. I'm going to take you through the 10 most common problems that you have with the machine and talk about how we go about fixing them. Number one is lack of power. There are three real sources for this. Number one is, this is a very different emergency stop than you see on a lot of American machines, because you have to actually twist this thing to get it to pop back out and have the power come on. So a lot of times guys they push it and they think it's going to come back out and it doesn't. You have to twist it and it pops back out, and then you've got power back to the machine. That's culprit number one. Number two is inexperienced folks sometimes can turn the proximity switch all the way down to 0. So I'm running wide open with wide speed here, but if somebody forgets and turns it to 0, you have no power and the machine's not going to run. The third component is there is actually a fuse on the frequency inverter inside of the cabinet. We're going to get into that in a little while when we talk about how to change the machine over from a 35, from an 1.5 inch to a 1 inch piece. And that sometimes that switch can blow. For instance, if somebody sticks 20 gauge, which is beyond the capacity of the machine, or 050 aluminum or something like that, the machine might not like it. It might blow that fuse. Or if you're running on a long, like 120-foot extension cord or something like that, and you have too much current developed because it's trying to carry the voltage over that distance, every now and then it will blow it. Make sure you replace the fuse with the fuse that's in the machine. It'll be outlined for each specific machine, and you make sure you get the right one, the right amperage, so you don't have a fuse that blows really easily. Okay? That's the number one. The second culprit is people not taking these ratchet handles all the way around to pressure. It's pretty simple. What you do, because these go round and round, so you could actually, if you wanted to, you could think that that was 1.5 right there, right? But there's almost no pressure. So we know that if we're doing, we have to go around until we feel pressure, until the rolls come in contact with each other, and then take it to the pre-set setting on the back of the machine. It's very important that you do that, because if you don't put enough pressure on it, it's not going to feed. I'm going to put a panel in now, and I'm going to show you what it looks like not to have enough pressure. So let me grab that panel. So I've got my panel now. I've got it inside the machine. I'm going to go ahead and set the pressure settings up to be correct, except I'm not going to do them correctly on number one. So I'll give you an idea of what it looks like when there's not done to the right pressure. Oh, got my proc switch, turn it up so I got forward feed here. Okay, so I slid the material up inside the machine. Now this is aluminum, so I'm going to set this pressure a lot differently. I refer to the back of the machine. I'm going to pull up my aluminum settings. I can wrap this down to a 25-inch radius, but I don't want to do that because I think with this long a panel I'll end up crashing it on itself. So we're going to go with a really light setting here. All right, I'm going to check this one. I'm going to set this one first, 3.7. And then these are all supposed to be set at 9. Okay, so when I first feel pressure, I start counting, and I take it to 9. Okay. Now I got the settings here, and I'm going to turn the machine on. Okay. All right. Stop. I don't have enough pressure on the top setting. You see it's running nice and straight. The other thing that will happen when you don't have enough pressure is you'll develop these oil canning dimples right here. Pretty easily fixed. All I have to do is put some pressure on it. Right now it's set at 0. I'm going to take it around to what my setting should have been, which is 9. Then generally you take a mark here and you mark it so you can take your template and see if you're getting the consistent bend that you want, okay? So I'm going to turn the pressure back up. And immediately we have a nice smooth curve here without the dimpling in it, okay? That's the biggest thing that you're going to have to remember when you go to non-ferrous materials. Copper, aluminum, and zinc have a tendency to be very dry materials, especially copper and zinc. Aluminum not that much, but what will happen is you'll get this rippling here, which means that roller is not tight enough. It's not stretching the material here enough. Okay, that's one. The next thing could happen is if we put way too much pressure here on the exit roll, okay, we could get the same thing. That is what can make this machine difficult to troubleshoot sometimes. And that's why you always want to start back from scratch. Because now I could have two problems working at the same time. So you got to make sure at least one of them can be set back to the factory. So I set the top one at 9. I got a little bit too much pressure. And we should see some deformation. And we're getting it right here in the panel, okay? Not that much because aluminum's nice and soft. But it's pretty simple to dial back in. I'm going to turn this back to 3.7, lock this back down, and now I should be able to get a consistent piece throughout the rest of the panel. Okay. What happens if you have the opposite problem? Suppose you have too much pressure. So I'm going to take this top guy, and I'm going to take it around. It should be at 9, and I'm going to crank it all the way around here to 2 1/4. Yeah, 2 1/4 is about all I can get out of it. It locks the machine down. Okay. Too much pressure, the machine won't even run, okay? Take it up a little bit higher. You see what's happening now? I'm getting this dive in the panel, okay? What that means, is it's stretching way too much on the top. It's nice soft material, and so because of this massive stretch that's taking place up here, it's not even touching this roll. It's way overbending it, and it's diving it down, okay? That is probably the biggest thing you want to do. So here's my suggestion when you're troubleshooting an issue where you're not getting enough curve or you're getting oil canning dimples here. Set this, the hand wheel setting, back to the factory setting. That way you don't have to worry that it's wrong, okay? The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to take this guy, and if you're getting dimples, you're going to add pressure. If it's underbent, which means it's sticking out straight, you're going to add pressure. If you have ripples here, like we have a little ripple here, you probably can't see it on the camera, but when I went for way big pressure, it has a tendency to stretch the material and you'll get waves in it. Back off when you have that problem, okay? Those are the main ways that you're going to go ahead and have a difficult panel, is when those things go wrong. I'm going to go ahead and get the material out of the machine now and see if we can cause less of a problem than we already have. Make sure I don't hit the camera. So turn this. What that means is that you have to take this off. Because we had that material running through so one-sided, sometimes it will actually pull down. One side will be pulling much harder than the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this guide off, get it out of the way. And you see it's starting to pull down here on the guide. So I'm going to have to run the material out of the machine. I'm going to back off the pressure here just a little bit. Actually, give me a little more pressure. Okay, so that's what happens when your pressure is wrong. By the time I got to the end of the panel, the pressure was so far off on the machine that it had already twisted. One side was running faster than the other. So that's why it's important to get that pressure right, have your template, and check it before you start running product. All right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to change the machine over from 1.5 inches to 1 inch, or from the German, they would call it 38 millimeters to 25. That's where the machine's name comes from. What you have to do is you have to remove this cover right here so you can get up inside the machine. When you change from a 1 inch to an 1.5 inch profile, or vice versa, you have to affect the speed. And we do that a couple of different ways. I showed you a little bit earlier about how to change that pressure by either adding it or subtracting it. You change how fast it feeds and how fast it forms. The other way to do it is we change the sprocket up inside the machine here to slow this roller down when we're going to 1.5 inches and to speed it up when we're going to 1 inch. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the safety cover off here that covers the sprocket so we can see what's going on up inside the cabinet. One of the things that we're going to do when we change the machine over is we're going to change the speed. We do that by changing a sprocket. What that sprocket does is it causes, because it's bigger, it's going to turn less revolutions. That means it's not going to travel as fast. You know, up top when I showed you how we could, during the troubleshooting section, I showed you how we could change how the material is being fed through the machine simply by changing the pressure. We're just doing the same thing now. We're just going to do it with a sprocket because we want to make a major speed change. Because on the female side, if we don't make a major speed change, it won't feed through the machine correctly. So I pop that cover off. Now, one of the things that you should make sure that you do is that the machine is unplugged, as well as it has the emergency stop tripped. That way we know that we don't have any problems. If you look up inside the machine here, there's a couple of things to see. There's a sprocket here that drives the main drive roller on the female side. This is the sprocket that we're going to change. Not either one of these, nor the one that's underneath this cover. That's a mistake that I've seen people make from time to time. You don't want to do that. It's the first one up here. That's the one. If you look on them, each one of them is actually labeled. It'll say either inch or inch and a half on the actual roller. So that way you really can't make a mistake. It'll say 1 or 1.5. This is a chain tensioner. It's very important. One of the most, one of the frequent things that can happen with this machine from a troubleshooting standpoint is that this becomes loose. When that becomes loose, that chain is allowed to vibrate, and that can cause speed changes. And you know that oil canning that we saw in the panel, or when we were talking about troubleshooting, actually can be caused by this tensioner being loose and allowing that roller to roll at different speeds. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this loose, and we're going to actually change this sprocket out and change it over to a 1-inch machine. So I'm going to take the first bolt out here. Okay. Watch your knuckles, that tensioner is going to pop around. Let me take the second out there. Now you'll see right here, I've actually set it up, well, luckily, where the actual link in the chain is right there. I can pop that out now and I can take that chain off. So now that we've removed the chain tensioner and the cover, what I want to do now is get the parts that I'm going to need to change the machine over from 1.5 inches to 1 inch. And they're mounted on the back side of the machine, usually right here, but I've taken this off so you can get a chance to look and see what the box looks like. It's actually mounted on the outside and says rolls and chain for 1 inch. The machine, when you get it in America, comes with 1.5 inches. So all you're going to need to get this loose is you're going to take a screwdriver and loosen the bolts on the edge of the box, which I've already done. And once that's done, you can take the top off. And inside you're going to find a roller. This roller goes up top on the machine, and we're going to change the, that's